So here we are.
Here we are.
So lovely to meet you via Zoom, and I've heard a lot about you, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. You have a lot of wisdom to share,
Mhm.
and as you know, I've been going through my own process for
Yes.
a few years actually, because as we all know, for the caregivers, that this process starts well before the passing of a loved one. It's part of the journey. So I'm Tony Cho, and I'm based in Miami Beach, and my whole life's work is on regenerative living and now regenerative dying, what that looks like, and how we can be. Um, the most supportive and the most in tune and the most in touch with the most sacred event of our lives, or one of the most sacred. You're born, you live, and you die. And our culture doesn't talk about it. And, I would love to hear a little bit about your background and how you got into this work. And yeah, if you can introduce yourself to the readers and to the
Sure.
listeners.
Well, thank you, Tony, and thank you for inviting me. This is so incredibly important for so many reasons. So we'll get all into that. I think you said a few of them definitely at the beginning here. My name is Suzanne O'Brien. I am a registered nurse by trade, and I've worked most of my nursing career in hospice care, which is end of life care, and oncology care, which is cancer care. And from the very beginning, I've had over now 20 years working in this field, but with over 1,000 people directly at the bedside of end of life and all different cultures and religions. And I've been able to work with people globally. I knew from the very moment that I stepped into nursing that we had an elder care demographic and that healthcare was really not health and not care, if I can just put it that way. And it seemed in the hospital setting that the patient was almost the last of the concerns. So right away, I was questioning what is happening here, but I also noticed a whole bunch of elderly people come into the hospital. Many didn't have visitors, died alone. And I thought, wow, what's happening? I remember about 6 months into being a nurse, I really was having a moment of saying this was the worst decision I ever made. And what am I going to do now? I went through 3 years of nursing school. I thought I would get fulfillment from this, and I'm miserable. And I heard a little voice that said, go to hospice, go to hospice. And I was like, where is that coming from? Number one. Number two, why am I hearing that? Because I have no end of life experience. That doesn't make any analytical sense. But when I heard it, there was an expansion. There was something that aligned. It was like almost like getting a breath of fresh air. And I said, I don't know what this is. I followed everyone's advice, and I'm just going to follow this because it feels like nothing I felt before. And the very first day I went out to see hospice patients, I knew I was in the exact place I was supposed to be in my life. And so when we learn about what is this life's journey, you said at the beginning, the importance of the day that you're born. I also think the day you realize why you were born, and then the day you die is incredibly sacred moments and transitions to the journey. So it was right in that moment that I realized that's how life works. It's not what do I think I'm supposed to be doing. It's not what I'm controlling and directing. It's what do I know? Where am I being guided? And it was that day that I said, I'll never make another decision other than what do I know? Where am I being called to be of service? And it's just led on this incredible global journey of building Doulagivers Institute and working with people all over the world to bring back death as the sacred natural experience it was meant to be, which we're pretty much all the way at the opposite end right now.
Thank you so much for that. It's so important. I may get emotional on this call because, this is such an important and also very fresh topic in my life. And I grew up around death and dying as a child, thanks to my grandmother, who was an AIDS activist,
Mm,
and she was at the bedside of many, many people, bringing joy and flowers and musicians. And we would go into county homes, poor homes essentially.
beautiful.
People had no visitors, and, they would die alone, which most people die alone. And many people do, or worse, in fear, or worse, being ransacked by their family members, rifling through, their personal belongings, just horrible things that we've desecrated the whole dying process, and we don't hold it sacred, and we commercialize it with Halloween, and we make it this very scary, morbid thing when
Mhm.
it is the most sacred ritual and
Yes.
rite of passage into the next realm, whatever that is, whatever you believe. However, people don't plan, they don't talk about it. And I was very fortunate that I was exposed to a beautiful way to be around death and dying and not to fear death and dying and to be there at someone's bedside and the gift of
Mhm.
that privilege of serving someone and walking someone home. And, it really begs the question, do you know who's going to be there in your last moments? And have you sorted those things out? And
Mhm.
have you planned for your own passing?
Mhm.
And in my case, I lost my beloved Jimena, who we call the Queen of Hearts, who was an angel on earth and a very, very elevated, pure soul that impacted so many people around the world with her soft power. It was what she didn't say that really impacted and land, and not even the beautiful words and the kindness of
Mhm.
her being and the femininity and just the beautiful essence and grace
Mhm.
to walk towards death in beauty, without fear, even though she was facing a very difficult diagnosis and very difficult physical limitations. She had breast cancer
Mhm.
twice, it had recurred and it had metastasized to her lungs, her brain. She had skin lesions, and she was an exquisitely beautiful human
Mhm.
inside and out. And just witnessing her go through this process was one of the most inspiring, beautiful experiences of my life, and also a super gift because we became so present with one another because we really tuned into the sacredness of each moment and living in that present moment and how finite our time on this earth is and how privileged we are to have
Mhm.
even breath. She struggled because she had cancer in her lungs, breathing. The last 2 weeks she was on oxygen. And
Mhm.
so it really just, I think that process of being there with her through everything and every doctor's appointment, just brings you closer to yourself, brings you closer to God. And the mystical things that have been happening since her passing has been blowing my mind. Just we got married on 11/11/11. I was in New York last week and I stayed at my friend's brownstone, 335 West 11th Street. And 3 + 3 + 5 = 11. And, she's been appearing to people in
Yeah.
dreams and sending rainbows and all
Yeah.
the different communications. And I'm a natural born skeptic. I grew up in a commune, in an ashram. My grandmother was a guru. And so I've always been skeptical of
Mhm.
the mystical, people claiming mystical experiences or paranormal experiences until I really tuned in to this very close love of my life, my soul partner. And it's really transformed my life. And, I grew up around a lot of death and dying, but as someone who's 47, it's not something that has been very present in my midlife right now, although I know a lot of people, have passed on. But being there and like the work that you're doing, being a death doula and having this incident, teaching people
Mhm.
what to do is such
Mhm.
a beautiful gift because people
Mhm.
don't have training. We don't train
Mhm.
people in the ritual. What type of music do you want
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
have playing for you? My wife had a set, had a sound list, had a
Mhm.
playlist on Spotify with all of her favorite musics and what fragrance do you want to have? She was like
Mhm.
loved rose oil and
Yeah.
rose essence. So we
Mhm.
adorned her with rose oils on her temples, and she was eating papaya because she couldn't really keep food down and she loved papaya.
Mhm.
And so like those types of details and like her shamans came and did 5 hours of medicine music to the sunset. And she got to look at the ocean and be at home in her bed, surrounded by her loved ones. And then we adorned her body with roses and put makeup on and made her beautiful because that's what she wanted. That was her wishes. And so everybody should have that ability if they're so fortunate. that they don't have an emergency death, or something that's an
Hmm.
accident.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of people that, don't really proactively plan for that. So, what are some of the things that, if that you've been at the bedside of 1,000 people plus in that sacred ritual, and
Hmm.
what are some of the things that have really moved you, or some of the things that you teach other people or offer as things that can really ease the process? Because many people are very fearful of dying, right, or transitioning.
Yeah. So, Tony, just the way you honor your love, it's so beautiful. It's just so beautiful to hear. And I'm just so glad that you have this relationship in your life that continues on. It's just different. Um, what a great thing to be able to share, right? That kind of love. So let's go back for a minute if we could. So I've been with people at the end of life and it was a calling to be in that space. And so most end of lives, and I'll be very honest, are not going as well as they could be going. So I'm just going to put it there because I don't really like to go down too heavy of a negative road because I don't think it doesn't really help anything, but we need to really be clear on how we got here. So when I was with people, these things would happen. They would be sharing with me what they're seeing, what they're feeling. And there was like, I'm getting chills now. And I had been witness to be in some of the most, you can't even put words to describe the feeling of unconditional love. It's like being at the veil, and then what people are sharing that they are excited to be crossing over where they're going. So, this fear of death that we have right now, where did that come from? What is the fear? And is it warranted? So, the first thing I'll remind people is that death is not a medical experience, it's a human one. And we've given it over to our medical system. We expect them to fix it. And first of all, it's not something that can be fixed, and it's not a medical experience, an event in and of itself. So, when we do that, we give away all of our preparation and power and all that's a part of this. And then how that does not work well is very evident, I think. When we first remember, spoiler alert, we've been dying for thousands of years. So I just want to like put it out on the table that as a human race, we've been dying for thousands of years. We know how to do this, but it's the last 100, 120 that we've made medical advances. And in one sense, that's a good thing. But in another sense, we've forgotten totally removed that end of life is a natural part of the life's journey and what people need to know to support with symptom management and preparation and all of the beautiful ritual that should be part of this sacred journey. And so just the practical things that you shared. And so for me as that hospice nurse, and people don't fully understand what hospice does or does not do. And as a hospice nurse, I'm supposed to teach the family how to do that end of life care, which 98% determined by Medicare is 98% is done by family caregivers when they usually don't know the first thing about how to do that care and they're petrified. This is a not working model and it's unfair. And so for me, I can't even teach people when they come on for a few days and they're petrified. So I created a training and I went to my CEO of my hospice and I said, and I had never spoken to him before. So this is a fun story. I knocked on his door and I said, he said, come in. And I said, end of life is not going well for most of the families. We have to do more. He said, that's all we can do. We can't do any more. So I was there for 1 hour once a week if my patient was stable. 1 hour once a week. It doesn't work. And so he looked at the training and he read it and he said, this is great. He goes, we can't do it. I said, why? He goes, we won't get reimbursed for it. So it won't fit into the medical insurance reimbursement structure. So by the third time I heard that, I just said, I'm just going to go to the library and teach it for free on a weekend. And whoever wants to come can come. By the way, this skill was handed down 100 years ago from a grandmother to a grandchild. People died at home. They were taught how to do this. This is not a medical experience. This is human. And we've lost that. We've outsourced that. And so, what do you think happened at the library? It filled up, there wasn't a seat left. And then I did it again, and then I put it online. And to this date, we have thousands of people that come live from all over the world for that training that's given for free to teach you how to care for your loved one at the end of life, a skill that we're all going to need because we're all going to be called at some point to show up for someone we love. Knowing how to do that changes everything. But this training also is infused with bedside stories. So you get the spiritual, you get the mystical, you get the emotional, what's happening because we're holistic beings. And I share some of those incredible stories that patients will share, which will leave you not only removing fear, but knowing about a possible bigger meaning to this whole thing we call the human being experience.
Mhm. I love that. And I love that, like you said, that, it's not going well and people don't have the tools. And I love that, people, we've given our power up to the medical system, and dying is not a medical, condition. It is a human condition, and it's going to happen to all of us. And this idea that we're going to biohack our way around death, I don't ascribe to it. I don't think it's healthy. I think I agree to be as healthy and as vital as long as possible to optimize
Sure.
for quality of life, but I'm not into this concept of never dying or
Why?
trying to
From and
apply.
may I just say, from what my beautiful patients have shared, this is the tough journey. This is the school of life. This is the I'm trying to figure out suffering. I'm dealing with the ego mind and the spiritual mind because this is what happens, Tony, at the end of life. We're holistic beings, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. The end of life, sitting bedside with so many people, as their physical body's diminishing, their spiritual body was growing. And there's one point that they have one foot in this world and one foot in the next. And they all of a sudden get what I call their spiritual wisdom or spiritual eyes. And they're like, oh, I get it now. I know why that happened. And I know why that happened. And all the puzzle pieces. It is incredible. It is about unconditional love. It is about non judgment. It is about learning and growing, which is super, super challenging. So, why would we ever want to? I don't want to stay in this. I want to learn my lessons. I want to contribute. I want to leave the world a better place because I was in it. But I also want to go where these beautiful people say they're going because it sounds incredible. And I know it is.
Yeah, and you know what? There are many tools also that people are not aware of that can help them get over fear. My wife was a
Yeah.
very brave, graceful, beautiful being, and my grandmother was a spiritual teacher, and she
Hmm.
was very inspired by, when she passed, in 2012, which was basically 5 months after she married us on 11/11/11,
Mm.
she got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
Mm.
She literally passed away to the day of what the doctor had told her that she would live to. And I think that that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And
Mm.
I don't advocate for doctors telling patients specific timelines because I think, yes, we know that the time is short. We know that the illness is serious, but the truth is they don't exactly know. And I think those types of things can instill fear. And so I think it's really, we didn't do that with my wife through the whole, even when she had brain metastasis and things that's happened, I specifically, and she specifically didn't want to know because she wanted to live her life with hope, but also facing reality of our own mortality. And I think that was something beautiful about her. But, my grandmother, who was a guru in Hinduism, they believe in reincarnation. And
Mhm.
so the rites of passage and ritual around death is very celebratory. It's very colorful, the cremation aspect of it, putting your ashes in the river and the chanting. And so she had 800 people in the temple,
Mhm.
chanting, and just there was this beautiful communal gathering around this rite of passage, which is such a beautiful thing. And so my wife was inspired by that. And there were certain aspects of her transition that incorporated that, roses and adorning the body and
Mhm.
really, really honoring the body. And she was cremated as well. And that's what she wanted because she wanted her ashes in Hawaii and Colombia and different places around the world that she wanted her essence. And when the representative from the crematorium came in, like we sat with the body for 3 or 4 or 5 hours. We wanted to
Mm.
be there with her in this very sacred moment where they're very close to this plane. And also, we live in an apartment, and so we wanted to also have a timing where there wouldn't be anybody around. So we basically timed it so at 5:30 in the morning, her body would be taken to the crematorium. But the point is when the representative came in, he was so taken aback at the amount of love and beauty of the temple and of the sanctuary that had been
Mhm.
created with that spiritual energy that was infused in every molecule and every inch of that space. And he began to cry. And this is
Yeah.
somebody who sees this all the time. And he said, it warms my heart so
Yeah.
much to see a death where there's love and there's so much love because I see the other side of it where people die in fear, they die alone or worse. You hear
Regret,
horrible
regret,
things.
regret. Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be that way. And thank
No.
you for showing people that there's many other ways and there's tools. And one thing that also helped my wife, and it's not for everybody, but she did high dose ketamine therapies, overseen by a doctor. And
Yeah.
that, it's a disassociative. And she did it not when she was really sick, but she had cancer. So I'm sure there was fear and anxiety around death. And
Mhm.
she had these very mystical experiences where she had this experience where she became the Buddha and became enlightened. And she didn't actually want to come back to this plane. And she had
Mhm.
another experience where she connected with the Palladians. And so she knew that she was
Mhm.
going to a different realm where she would be among this angelic council. And so I think that was helpful for her. And we also did a lot of work with divination around different traditions, whether it was the Egyptian divination of the Temple of Ma'at in family constellations, where your heart is weighed against that of an ostrich feather to determine how lighthearted your life was and really kind of what's the purpose of like those types of teachings really helped her prepare for her own death and become exemplary in how to celebrate death. And then since then, I've had probably a dozen celebrations of life for her all over the world. And we have 11 days of honoring her in November in
I
the
love
month
it.
of when we were celebrating our 14-year wedding anniversary and being together 17 years. And I personally don't support or believe the way that we set up the whole, funeral system and the whole death. And it's like the last thing that I wanted to do when I was in shock when my wife passed was plan an event. It's like that's the last
Yeah.
thing. I needed time to grieve. I needed time to go deep inwards. And so now I've had this beautiful amount of months and months and
Yeah.
months to properly plan so people can be there because people want to pay their respects. They want
Of
to
course.
connect with that spirit. And
Mhm.
so it doesn't have to be any which way that social norms dictates it needs to be. It needs to be what makes your heart sing and what connects you and what that being wanted and how they wanted. So now for the next year of my life plus, I'm doing all the trips that she and I never got to do together. And we got to see the world, but we're going to go to Japan with her ashes to see the cherry blossoms in March. And I'm going to
Mhm.
bring her ashes to the beach in Hawaii that she wanted to spend more time in. And I went to Mount Shasta and brought her ashes there with our dear friend who's a music woman. And so that's how I'm honored. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it is really keeping her alive and keeping me connected to her spirit. And that's one way that's different than what the norm is, right?
Yeah, so the norm, when we say standard and traditional, when we talk about funerals, the traditional funeral today is not traditional, it's a standard. That how did it become a standard? Because there's no way, in my opinion, that you can go in and to a funeral home between 2 and 4 and wrap it up at 4 o'clock and say put closure to this transition that this person you've loved for a lifetime or years. It doesn't work that way. We're outsourcing our end of life. The number one question that families ask me when somebody dies is, what do we do next? And they quickly usually call the funeral home because they're just in fight or flight. And that funeral home can come very quickly, whisk that body away. They never see it again. It looks different. Like, this is all so unhealthy that we have to question. And I love that. Why are we doing the things we're doing? Who says that it needs to be done this way? What is my heart saying? And not only so, I'm going to invite you and your listeners to think of it this way. This is the beautiful vehicle we've been given for this experience. And what if that day that we transition is a second birth? And what if we just change form? So our relationship with our loved ones is still our relationship with our loved ones. It just looks different. It's in a different way, but it's still there. It's up to me if I want to be open to that relationship. And I love that you said the celebrating and the continuing on the journey with her, going to different places. That is all there fully. But I think we've got to go back to the very basics of how did we get to a place in our world that death is something to be feared and not talked about and not planned on? Because I want to share with people this. When we don't even think about what quality of life means to me and where I would want to be at the end of this journey and what's important, when it shows up, and by the way, 100% of the time it will show up, it's usually a train wreck, a scramble, and not just for the person at the end of life, for all of those loved ones and family members. When I choose what I want, like your beautiful wife who said, I want to be at home and rose oil and this on the playlist and watching the ocean, I mean, gorgeous. It gives you. It gives you a blueprint and a way, a ritual of helping and healing her to birth out of this world, which is incredibly important for our grief and bereavement in these situations.
100%. And, I think most people think about preparation for death as wills and estates and trust, and that's all legal jargon. That's not
That's
the
one
most
side.
important. And
Yeah.
that is important. And I think what Jimena showed us, and we had a very simple arrangement. If I were to die, then she would handle everything. And it would be her decision because we had such
Mhm.
deep trust with
Mhm.
we didn't even have everything in writing.
Mhm.
Many things were just, this is what I want, and I trust you'll do the right thing by my
Mhm.
family, etc. Because she also didn't want to put any undue pressure on me. Yes, we had a will, we had these things, but some people leave a mess, like you talked about it, both spiritually, financially, etc. And then some
All of it.
people, like my wife, left this wave of a cleanse. And what I
Yeah.
saw is that it actually wiped out any negativity, any bad blood, historical karmas
Mhm.
between people for reasons that are unknown or insignificant
Mhm.
or unimportant in the grand scheme. It was like a big wave, cleansing wave that washed over my whole world. And people that I haven't talked to in decades were just so kind and compassionate. And I
Mhm.
got to see a side of humanity that
Mhm.
I know is possible, but I never
Mhm.
witnessed in such a degree of generosity, of giving and kindness. I mean, even this week, I'm going to Kenya on a fully invited trip, and it's a humanitarian mission to go to a refugee camp and go to a mangrove restoration project and a regenerative safari and kind of reimagine cities of the future. It's really what and
Yeah.
civilization.
Yeah.
And that the ritual part of it as
Mhm.
religion, is evolving and faith is evolving beyond faith and hopefully beyond politics, or what are the things that bring us together? And death is one of those events and one of those rituals. And, I really wanted to ask you,
Mhm.
something that was really important. You're encouraged planning for a good death. I think Jimena's death was an exemplary death that has
Mhm.
inspired people all over the world. Leading up to it, it's not just the day of or the days leading up to it. But what is the single most important emotional or spiritual piece of the preparation that someone can do today in your mind to ensure that they live a more present and purpose-driven life rather than waiting until they're facing a
Yeah.
terminal diagnosis or an emergency and having that preparation, which brings peace? I think ultimately that's what we're all
Mhm.
looking for is that peace, right?
Yes. All right. So this is really beautiful. And I think if I can just say this, that the very first day I started working with hospice patients, my life completely changed. And I'll tell you why. It was really what you started out with today about the gift of everything, the gift of breath, the gift of being able to, go to the beach, or everything takes on a whole different level of gratitude because we are clearly in the understanding that one day this journey will not be as I know it today. Death is one of the greatest teachers about how to live. And when people will say, okay, well, what is a good death? And from a practical standpoint, there's choices, but from this bigger vision and view, a good death is a good life. What does that mean? And it really means don't miss it. And when I say don't miss it, you had talked about the gift of you with your beautiful wife of being really present with each other when she was in that place. And knowing that we're going to transition one day and have an end of life allows us to be really present with our days. And that is the gift. And so, if I may share the four truths that people at end of life, and I noticed this right away from different cultures and religions, people as they got their spiritual wisdom started to say the same things about what they want you to know. And it was these four things. Number one, there is no death. Because they would see loved ones that have died already. They would see where they're going. I mean, it's just beautiful and sacred. So there is no death. Second thing they would say is that we're all connected to one unconditional loving energy. They would reference this as home. And what struck me is even people who lived a very devout way of thinking their whole life on earth, it became more of a spiritual oneness. They would say there's no judgment. And I think this is really important. Our world is challenged right now, right? And everyone is pointing fingers at each other and we're all judging each other. And we're living in the ego awareness, not the being awareness. We're human beings. And at the end of life, we see that. We see the human part literally start dissolving and the being part, this is your true soul self. If we knew that we were all connected, if we could tap into that love, that loving energy, if we knew that there's no judgment judging us, it's not that we're not responsible for all of our choices, because we are. So we can make this as challenging as we want, or we can start embracing the heart and the compassion of one another and what unites us in this thing called humanity, right? And when they say that, it's such an incredible, beautiful thing, because so many people at the end of life are carrying, guilt and regrets and anger and just different things that happen in the human experience. And when we realize that forgiveness and compassion for ourselves as well as others is the transformative tool to shift that. And then when I understand that, how do I embrace people on the street? Hopefully with that, don't judge people. Everyone is carrying a story you know nothing about. We're all in this together. Have compassion. And it's just so powerful to hear these four truths, and that the whole learning that everything happened in your life for a reason. When you were telling your beautiful story about your grandma and then having this beautiful relationship that changed form at an earlier chronological age than many people, I started to immediately think there's no accidents, like the whole thread of watching your grandmother and having this, and then you being able to share this story to help others on a bigger platform. And you talked earlier about life, and now you're talking about end of life, and they're not different than one another. They're completely together, because knowing end of life will show up makes me say, okay, what is this about? And I tend to treat each day like it's one little lifetime, because I'm not guaranteed anything. So if I know what's important to me in this day, being present, having compassion, holding a frequency of love, not just people I meet, not having judgment, being compassionate, but what energy am I projecting out into the world? What vibration am I holding? Not missing the moments of awe and wonder that are all around us, so that hopefully when that day comes, I can be able to say, okay. So a good end of life starts way back here with what's important to you. And you really shared that. It's really, really beautiful. Best teacher about how to live I've ever seen.
Death is the most regenerative teacher. I really think it. And Jimena called cancer her greatest teacher because it made her face her own mortality with grace and love, and realize that this was just her soul contract, and that this body isn't the only thing. It's a vessel that carries this soul and carries your light and your legacy.
So,
And
yeah,
she
many of my patients have said the same thing. And as a young nurse, I didn't understand how could they say that cancer is the best thing that ever happened to them. When I was working in a temple in Thailand in 2019 teaching doula givers, I remember at this temple, people would come for end of life, and they were all different ages. they'd sit in a circle, and people in that circle were saying this was the happiest time they ever had in their lives at this temple. They were dying. They had a 4-part way that they helped them. They took all the sugar out of the diet and did a plant-based diet, number one. Number two, they did yoga. Number three, they did meditation. And the fourth thing was forgiveness.
Mm,
And so when we hear from patients at the end of life saying this cancer was the best thing that ever happened because they finally connected with who they truly are. If you, if I, if we could share this messaging, which we are, teaching people that you can connect to that part of you today, but it's choices, and it's understanding we're human beings, right? There's two energies here. Why wouldn't I want to tap, just like that day that I found my way to hospice in that corridor of the hospital feeling completely lost, and go to hospice? That's the higher being self. If we can know that there's those directions, if we can know how to tap into that and let it guide us and lead us, not direct this, and let it just unfold of how we're supposed to contribute in this and connect in this world, life becomes a whole different experience.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, the preparing for a good death is having a good life and having forgiveness, because so many of us hold grudges, which create
Mhm.
cancers and dis-ease within our bodies and our cells. And my wife always used to say that gratitude is the highest frequency, even higher than love. Without gratitude, we can't even feel love fully. And so
Mhm.
gratitude is the blossom that opens up the capacity to have infinite amounts of love and compassion. And like you said, and that starts with forgiveness and starts with forgiving yourself and forgiving others so that you can move on to self-love. And so many of us, I consider myself a very spiritual being with a lot of tools. I grew up in a spiritual community, and that's a very big privilege that many people tools of meditation, which I said is so much, so very important, physical movement modalities, qigong,
Mhm.
tai chi,
Mhm.
martial arts, yoga, all of that
Mm.
embodies, gets us in our body. This is a temple. This is a
Mhm.
vehicle
Mhm.
temple for our souls. And most of us don't treat it as such. And that's why many of us suffer through the process. However, I think if we can embrace gratitude and we can live in the moment, then we can go towards this sacred graceful ending, the end of life, our sunset of our life, and we can really do it in
Mhm.
beauty and do it in a way that is really regenerative. And my whole work is focused on going beyond sustainability, regenerative placemaking, regenerative living. How do we create circular economies? How do we support small
Mhm.
businesses? How do
Mhm.
we go back to the village, the butcher, the baker, the barber, knowing your neighbor, that basic
Yes.
human connection. And I
Yeah.
think that all the studies, and I'm good friends with Dan from Blue Zones, and all the
Yeah.
studies on longevity is going back to connection. How deep are your connections with your family and with your community? Because that gives you purpose. That gives you the gratitude and the will to live a long, full life because you've got those meaningful connections. And so I think for me, one thing that I would recommend is make sure that you're developing meaningful connections with people now, because those are the people that are going to be with you at the end of life or when you're going through an illness or a challenge. And that's really important to have. For me, this process, my grieving process has been the pain has been accelerated by so much community medicine. I've been embraced by so much love and kindness
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
I'm not that sad all the time. I mean, I have moments and waves, because as we know, grief comes in waves, and
Yeah.
there's different ways of coping with it and dealing with it. And for me, embodying the grief has been the best, and going to the ocean and going to the
Mm.
beach and really bike riding and exercising and being with
Yeah.
community has really helped my process. And I'm just so grateful for that, because what a
Yeah.
blessing to have that, and
Absolutely. But here's the thing, Tony, and I love what you just shared. The only way that we're going to create the shift is going back to the concept of community, taking care of community once again. Again, we go back to giving away our power. People are waiting for a certain president to be elected and waiting for a law to be changed and out there in the streets and arguing and rah-rah. And look, I think those things can be helpful, but hey, I have a choice every single day how I'm showing up. And if we got back to presently seeing each other, who are the elders in our community? Who's the one that did have somebody have an end of life? Let's just get together and celebrate and be together. That's the shift. That's the shift of getting back to present on just so many levels. And then, of course, rolling it into how are we treating the planet and how are we treating, our food source, and coming back with those sustainable things and those different ways to make the shift. And it is happening. It's coming. In the past, when somebody had an end of life with somebody in their family, they used to hang something on the door, on the front of the door. So people knew they were grieving. And I think it's such a beautiful thing because sending that person love and holding that person in your community in that space. And now we're just walking past each other. We don't even know the stories that we're carrying. And so it's so disconnected, but we can bring this back simply by a shift in how we choose to show up today. And here's the thing, all of us, no one's getting away from this, right? So our animals die. All of us will have end of lives. How are we not coming together in this space, and having compassion for one another, knowing how challenging it is, but also what can we learn? What can we learn from it?
Beautiful. Yeah, no,
Mm,
it's so rich, these teachings of death positive approach to this sacred ritual and preparing for it. And we have a few minutes left, in our conversation, which has been
yeah.
such a joy and such a
Mm.
pleasure. And, thank you for your wealth of,
Oh,
of knowledge and
thank
and
you.
your experience. And, that what you're teaching people is perhaps one of the most important skills of their life. It's teaching people to prepare for their death, but it's teaching people how to live the best that they can in the moment. And I
Yeah.
think that's what my wife, who was the most present, untethered human, we were opposite. We would always say that, I'm in overdrive and she's in reverse, and so we kind of meet in the middle and we were the yin and the yang,
I love it.
balancing of the energy. And one last topic that is very interesting, conventional wisdom tells you, you need to let go and you need to move on, when you're grieving. And I reject this concept because for me, like I said, Jimena was the divine feminine and I'm the masculine. That energy, that yin and yang, that Shiva
Mhm.
Shakti, that balance is what really made the magic, right? It was that that
Mhm.
that alchemy of these two souls, of these sacred, souls. And I felt so much more her teachings being able to be integrated into my own soul and bringing her energy and integrated into my own being, that I feel that she's with me, that she's part of me now. Her teachings are part of me. And that is what has given me the most comfort and peace, to know that she's actually with me everywhere, but that her teaching and her essence is integrated into my being. And it's made me a softer person. It's
Always.
it's made me a more compassionate, loving, kind
Mhm.
person, because that's the feminine energy. And I think it's important for men to know that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's actually important to be vulnerable. And I've
Very.
I've been sharing my process completely open and putting my heart out there without fear of being hurt, because I just feel like this is the gift that she gave me, and is the gift that she's giving others through this process, by sharing this
Mhm.
process, because we're all going through it at one stage or another, either with someone we love or through ourselves. So why not share, you know potential opportunities for people to heal and to grow and to come together? And that is the human experience, is the pain, and through the pain is where the good stuff comes. That's where the lotus comes birthed out of the mud. It's all of that challenging and hard times. And that's what happened to me. Everything was collapsing on me all at once, financially, business wise. My wife is dealing with a crazy diagnosis, and I had to just be in the moment and grateful for every breath and every moment, every sunset on earth. And that's the lesson, because it's all can be very stressful, but it's also how you approach it. And are you coming from a place of gratitude and detachment? Are you coming from a place of, it's too much for me? And I think that
Mm,
work and meditation and community,
mm.
of those things can help the medicine, of love and feeling that moment without running away from it. Because many of us run away from these moments when it's really our moment not to run away or around, but to go through with an open heart, vulnerably and
Mhm.
sharing what you need, communicate, right?
Yeah, and if I may use a little tool that I use and teach is that when we're human beings, and so this is what end of life has taught us. There's really two parts to us. And so when we're in the human experience and it is overwhelming and things are happening, right? To step back for a minute, to invite you to take a walk in nature and to, because you're in the reactive, it's all encompassing, which I understand these things are really hard. Go take a walk in nature, do some deep breaths, connect with that heart energy, the being energy. And if you could look when you're in that space, and I know we all know it when we feel more grounded and centered, if you can look at what's happening and say, what is the gift here? And I know these things don't always look like gifts. What is here and how am I supposed to show up in the highest way in these moments? Because we're all going to be in them. And then for you being the teacher that you are and this and Jimena being the teacher that she is and continues, this story is so incredibly beautiful and powerful. Is it that we have death all wrong? Do we have our relationship with death all wrong in our world today? And by the way, if we are just running on ego mind, if people don't realize there's a being part to them, which when you're part of an end of life and see the sacredness, you know that there's something so much more. The ego mind, separate, power, all of those things. If the collective is just running on ego out there, which I think it is it directly related to possibly or being infused by the fact that we've removed one of the greatest teachers about what life is about from our awareness? I'm going to say absolutely yes. So, is it almost as simple as changing our perspective and this relationship with something that is 100% guaranteed being from the number one fear in the world to a profound sacred transition?
I love that. It is the gift of life is death. And the way that we honor it and approach it is what can make that ambrosia and that mana so much sweeter. And there's my memories of my time, those precious moments. The last 3 months of my grandmother's life were the
Mhm.
most beautiful part of my relationship of 42 years because it was so real and it was so present. And so people who miss out on that because it's hard for them to see somebody suffering or going through a physical deterioration. You know what? Toughen up, get there because that's where the good stuff is. Be there for that because that's when it's the most real. And if you can live your life without a crisis, health crisis or otherwise, in that presence of, this is a precious every moment is an end of life moment, right? Every
Yeah.
moment.
And the greatest teacher for them right now is to realize, oh, one day that is going to happen with my mother, with my father, because just them knowing that subconsciously, consciously, or both allows them to get more present, to say, okay, it's not, oh, we have to go have lunch and oh, the annoying things that they're, everything takes on a whole new level of gratitude and appreciation because we're having this moment and we're not always going to have the opportunity to have it. So it's beautiful.
Oh, well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Suzanne. Thank you so much for the work you're doing, for the people that you're helping. I hope you'll come visit us at our retreat center and maybe we'll do a retreat together.
I love it.
The good death. I love the topic. I love the title. And you're such a beautiful soul. And thank you
Thank
for all
you.
the work that you're doing in this world. It's so important. And I can't wait to share all your wisdom, your pearls of wisdom around death as the greatest teacher and as the sacred transition and as the biggest teacher and gift for how to live a most present, fulfilling, and meaningful life, because that is the teaching and that there's something beyond all of this. There's something much bigger than the human experience. There's this oneness, there's consciousness, there's all of that. And I can tell you, I communicate with my ancestors more now than ever before, and they are there wanting to help and guide us. Like you said in the beginning, this life is guided if we wake up and stop sleepwalking. So I hope people can tune into the guidance and the wisdom of all of our angels and guides and ancestors that are here helping us on this journey. We're not alone.
Never. I love it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Take care.